Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Alliance Bernstein. Since 2019, employees have impacted our community by giving more than 5,000 hours of volunteerism in Middle Tennessee. AllianceBernstein.com. Alliance Bernstein is not affiliated with National Public Radio.
I'm Khalil A. Kulona, and this is Nashville. Climate change. Look, there's been a lot of intense debate on if climate change even exists. Everyone wants to have a voice in this debate. From climate change activists to climate change deniers, governments on a local and national level wrestle with ideas and policies surrounding our environment. I don't have the latest numbers in front of me, nor have I talked to Al Gore recently, but I feel like if you ask most people, they will say the weather, our environment, is changing. But that's just it. Not everyone has had their voice heard in the discussion about climate change. Here in Nashville, something is developing that will give people a voice. The voice of people who have been impacted, and they've been ignored way too often. Through the Nashville Environmental Justice Initiative, Urban Green Lab and TSU have joined forces so that we can hear the voices and testimonies of people here in Nashville whose lives have been impacted by climate change. I'd like to welcome our guests. Stephanie Roach is the Assistant Director of Special Initiatives at Urban Green Lab, and Dr. Reginald Archer is the Assistant Professor at the Department of Agricultural and Environmental Studies at TSU. I want to welcome you both to the show. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Khalil.
Okay, so I want to hear from both of you on this first question. Why are we doing this sort of oral history project? Stephanie?
Yeah, the oral history project that we designed was meant to be exceptionally intentional. As you mentioned, there are so many Nashvillians who have been historically excluded from the conversation of what happens when we have a shifting climate. So this was a creative approach, really just a listening activity. I don't think we do enough of that in Nashville. When we think of justice initiatives, often we come from a place of imposition rather than collaboration. And this allows that unheard group agency and amplification of their voice.
Dr. Archer, why this project? Why now?
Well, the Urban Green Lab has this mission of teaching and learning about environmental and climate justice. And when we came together in 2020, we determined that, we wanted to teach about climate justice, but how do we teach a community about climate and environmental justice without understanding, what level of education do they have around these issues? And so we got together and we received funding from the Dan and Margaret Maddox Fund to do this Nashville Environmental Justice Initiative and go into the community, collect oral histories and archive those, and get an understanding of where people are in terms of their understanding of climate justice, environmental justice. How are they experiencing these issues, or how have they experienced these issues in the past? Do they even know that they're experiencing these issues? Before we can go in and say, hey, I'm a scientist, let me teach you about climate justice. We wanted to connect with the community.
Okay, so some people may be confused with the term oral history. Stephanie, can you explain it to us? What is an oral history?
Sure. An oral history is a collection of perspectives. In this case, we are collecting stories about impacts from a shifting climate, but we're also collecting perspectives that have to do with access to resources, access to transportation, housing, and good health options.
How many people did you talk to, for example? Give us an example of how you went about collecting these oral histories.
Sure. Well, we landed on a number of 8 feature voices. Again, oral histories often tend to be really academic. They're very long form, so you can expect a true oral history to be about 6 to 10 hours. And, we didn't have that, but we knew we wanted to do something a little bit longer than a journalistic piece. So we landed on a 1.5 to 2 hour form. And it ended up being exceptionally conversational. And so we were able to connect this anecdotal, these authentic lived experiences to real science, to the change that we're seeing. So,
Dr. Archer, why did TSU want to be involved?
Well, we understand that climate change is happening, and we have a lot of students in our environmental sciences program that we want to be able to not only give them the academic knowledge, but we want to provide experiences for them, experiential learning opportunities where they can go out in the communities, engage with the communities, and get an understanding of people that are impacted by these issues, not just what we get in the books or what we learn from our texts and from our advisors, but we know that climate change happens and it makes hardships that communities already feel even worse by exacerbating those issues, and especially in frontline communities. Those are communities that are historically and have historically been marginalized. And so we wanted to be able to connect the education that we learn in the classroom to educating in the community and connecting with and engaging with community members.
How's the partnership working out so far?
It's a pretty good one. I think the funniest quote you ever gave was, "Our biggest problem is where to land for lunch." So we're a pretty easygoing partnership, but TSU brings that wealth of knowledge, expertise, of course, in the fields of science and environmental justice. And Urban Green Lab, we bring that science background as well, but also the education and human component as well.
All right, let's hear a clip from the project. Sure. Stephanie, can you set this up?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be hearing from one of our participants, Elios Freeman, who is a Nashville native who left for some time and came back. And when she returned, she really came to a changed Nashville. And I think it's a really unique perspective to see how that evolution has played out. She's talking in this particular clip about an intact community. And what I think she's really getting at, you'll start to hear, is one of our end goals is developing communities of care. And so let's hear what she has to say.
Here we go.
When you left in 1970 and came back about 30 years later, what were the differences moving back to the South after some time in the North?
Yeah, I was heartbroken, and I'm still heartbroken. We didn't talk a lot about the community that I grew up in, but it was an intact community.
Educate me on what you mean by an intact community. I can make some guesses, but what do you mean?
So I think I could ask you, what is a community that is strong? I mean, you had people who have homes, who own their homes. You had people who looked after each other as a neighborhood. You had a stretch of community, even in the segregated South, that was self-sufficient. And so on this, we were blessed to be a part in Nashville, Tennessee, in North Nashville particularly. We were blessed to literally be a part of a community that had every resource that you need right there on that street. The movie theater, especially in a segregated society where you were told you were not even a human and to keep out, And so, but what was able to develop in our neighborhood and in neighborhoods across the country is self-sufficient neighborhoods, banks, cleaners, everything that you need. So when I say that, I grew up in a community where whatever you needed was right there. The churches were there. My church was a couple of blocks over from Jefferson Street itself. I don't like, even when I talk about this, we're not talking about ideals. And of course, when you're a child, you don't know all the stuff. Oh, except that some people like me, you listen and you kind of see stuff. So, but we're not going to talk about that. But we're not talking about ideal. I'm sure you had all of the issues that you had, but there was not crime. There wasn't crime. You didn't have men who were half your men in your population incarcerated or more. My brother points this out, that I mentioned that we lived in my grandmother's home, but all the other families had two parents in their homes all around us. Yeah. So you had the stability of mothers and fathers in the homes. We raised an issue about that. I even challenged that emphasis. That's definitely an ideal, but the fact that you have a single mother raising a child doesn't mean that you're going to have belligerent children. So that's what I mean by intact, a solid, not only having resource, but having connection.
Now, we're going to meet Miss Elios a little bit later in the show, but first I do want to ask, Stephanie, what did you learn from this part of the interview?
When you hear Elios's words, you know that a community of care is possible. You know that the end game that we are working towards is possible, and that there is a deep well of strength in these communities that have been historically marginalized, these participants that have been hit first and worst, you know that there is true empowerment that they can draw from. And we're seeing a lot of that in the community. And that was a really wonderful surprise to find through the course of this process.
Now, Dr. Archer, education is the backbone of both of the organizations involved in this project. Why pick an oral history to teach the community about environmental justice? You slightly touched on it a little bit earlier. I'd like you to expand.
Yeah, again, I think what we, in order to educate, we wanted to make sure we understood where these community members are coming from. We have policymakers, we have educators, and then we have community members that have different voices, different perspectives, and there's a gap between them all. And we wanted to come together so that, with the things that Urban Green Lab does and the way we educate and the way we connect with community at Tennessee State University are different. But we wanted to bring those stakeholders together in a way that we can understand through their voices and empower them with their voices. This is part of making climate change personal and bringing the voices to the table where those people are hit hardest from underinvestment and, again, marginalization and those kinds of things. And they don't get to have their voices heard as an academic might or as a policymaker might. And so this is a way to sort of close that gap, bridge that gap in a sense.
Now, we've heard the term community of care. What is that exactly? And why is that a goal? Why is that goal foundational to this work you all are doing?
Sure. I'll take that one. A community of care is actually a mental health term that we've expanded upon in environmental justice. And that really just means communities that not only look after each other, but provide access to equitable resources, to healthy resources. And it's just making sure that there's an even playing field for everyone to thrive in, and that there are always places where you can go that you're kind of blanketed and cared for within that group.
I'll add, excuse me, it's a way for us to respect their experiences and the knowledge and that community members have, and a way for us to, again, bring those voices to the table versus us coming in as scientists and policymakers saying, we know the science, we can tell you how to live your lives, instead of learning from the community members who have been experiencing these changes that we don't necessarily pick up from scientific data. And so having those voices and connecting with those communities and respecting those experiences, part of that community of care.
Yeah,
No.
Yeah, when you cross-pollinate the human element, the narrative and the story with the science, you get this new knowledge. And that's, I've been reading Robin Wall Kimmerer and the author of Braiding Sweetgrass. And that kind of indigenous wisdom blended with the science really enriches the outcome and the product of what we hope, again, our outcome to be. And it also just gets you out into the community, because that's often an audience that's overlooked as well.
Like science cannot quantify resilience, but this is something that these communities often experience, overly experience. In fact, what keeps these communities kind of going in the face of these extremely difficult challenges? Stephanie, you mentioned that they're the first hit and the worst hit continually. What keeps people going?
I think the hope that it can be better. I think, again, that knowledge that they're drawing on the togetherness and the solidarity of these communities. Even though they are the hardest hit, they oftentimes are the first to pull together. And, that makes them hardy. They're very ready to rely on one another in a way that, maybe not every neighbor in Nashville might. And so dissecting how that works and then creating a plan to, again, amplify, hey, this is a way that you can move forward in the world resiliently and bringing together a more sustainable Nashville. I think that's the worth in looking at what drives them, what connects them.
And hearing the voices, hearing others' voices enables community members to realize that, I'm not in this by myself. There are others who are feeling these things and have voiced it in a way that maybe my voice couldn't communicate, but nevertheless, I'm not in this alone. And so we can build this community of care and community of practice to help each other come out of these in a more positive way.
Now, I understand the project incorporates a geographic information system, also known as GIS. Dr. Archer, can you explain what that is and how it's being used in the project?
So GIS is some set of applications that allows us to take data and information and build relationships or try to understand relationships between, for example, climate and income or race and other factors that may come into play. So it's a set of data and layers that we can map. We can map different phenomenon, in this case, climate justice and environmental justice issues. And so the GIS is going to enable us to take these oral archives and these oral histories and these experience and map them. At the same time, we can look at those maps and see, where are the resources that can be found in those communities where people are feeling these issues or feeling the effects of the different climate shifts that are occurring. Where are the resources? What are the trends? How is this changing over time? And we can do that with the mapping technologies that GIS brings to the table.
Where can people find that online?
Where can people find GIS online?
Yeah, the GIS that's being used in the project.
Oh, we do have a website now.
We do, yes. There's Voices of Resilience on Urban Green Lab's page. The GIS component is still under development. We want to make sure that we land it well. So yeah, that is forthcoming.
Yeah. And the GIS component will be basically, we're going to be building a story map, is what it'll be called. That will include interactive mapping data plus links to resources that communities can find, where they are, where these other voices, and connect with resources.
And listeners, the landing page for the project is in a web post for this episode. You can find that at thisisnashville.org. Dr. Archer, before I let you go, what do you want our listeners to walk away from?
I want the listeners to walk away from this knowing that if they have a voice and they want people to know what they're feeling in the community, and they want their voices heard, then they can be part of this project. And they can have their voices memorialized and feel empowered and become more engaged.
Dr. Reginald Archer is an assistant professor of agricultural and environmental studies at TSU. Dr. Archer, thank you very much for being with us today.
Associate professor.
Associate professor. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
All right, Doctor, again, thank you for being with us. And Stephanie Roach is going to stick with us through the break.
Thank you.
When we return, we'll hear parts of the Oral History Project and meet some of the voices who have shared their stories. Stay with us. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil A. Kulona, and this is Nashville. We're talking about a new project that hears directly from people in Nashville who've been affected by climate change. The project is from a collaboration between Urban Green Lab and TSU through the Nashville Justice Initiative. Now let's hear a clip from another oral history, someone who's been a guest on This is Nashville, Miss Pearl, Nella Frierson.
How would you describe Nashville's climate as it is today?
It's like it's so goddamn hot. I've never experienced it this hot ever. It's like I didn't think about it much until I experienced it. But, it's like it used to be like a shield used to be there. It'd be the sun, then, of course, the clouds. Then it was like a shield where the sun get through, but it won't burn you. Just, it won't be so hot that you feel like you're finna pass out, or that you feel like your blood is boiling, or that you feel lightheaded. Because I'm like, wait a minute, what is going on? Because I still stay outside a lot, but I tell the children 30 minutes out, 30 minutes in, 30 minutes out. We got to be realistic. Then at a certain time, 11:30, we ain't outside no more until about 4, 5. It's too hot.
What do you remember of the climate when your mom would be out in the garden?
It was the best word I can say is happy. It was like you wanted to be outside because the sun was out. But it was like joyful. It was like you could stay out there all day long and you just take a little hose and wet yourself down and then you just keep going. But now you wet yourself down, you're still going to be burning up. it's uncomfortable. And most of the little children do not be outside, ever.
Stephanie Roach with Urban Green Lab is still with us. Stephanie, what are the challenges we already face in Nashville because of a shifting climate?
So the main things that I can think of are, first off, I mean, I think everyone can agree, just as Ms. Pearl shared, there is a real urban heat island effect, which basically comes down to there's so much concrete that we're absorbing all the heat. So the city as on a whole is hotter, and that translates to our days into the seasons are hotter for longer. I think too about the shifting flux in cold temperature. So it's not just that everything is overly warming. You have real flux in weather patterns. And so you're also seeing too more frequent and severe storms, along with so more opportunity for flooding and really bad tornadoes.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd like to introduce someone who's been a part of this oral history project and has experienced climate change firsthand in her community. We talked about it a little bit earlier. I'd like to welcome Miss Elios Freeman to the show. Miss Elios, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you here with us. Tell me this, Stephanie. Why did you identify Miss Elios as a good fit for an interview?
Well, she is an exceptional storyteller, for one. She holds a lot of institutional history here in Nashville. But hers is, again, a really compelling story of someone who has seen Nashville when the climate was one way and now is able to speak on that evolution, on how it has changed dramatically now.
Miss Elios, what did you think when Stephanie first approached you about this project?
I would first say that Stephanie and I were part of another project, and a relationship developed. Mm-hmm. So when Stephanie began to talk to me about this project, it was out of relationship that I really began to, listen in a different way. And even in our initial conversations where I was sharing who I was and my own background in Nashville, and she was sharing the project, we talked about this evolve. The conversation evolved where she could then share with me, oh, we're doing this and you could be involved. And out of relationship, I not only took interest, but also felt that I trusted her enough to become involved. So that's how that happened.
Okay. Can you give us a little bit of your perspective of, you were born here, raised here?
I was born and raised in Nashville.
You left.
I left for about 30 years.
You come back.
And I come back around 2000.
Okay, so talk to me a little bit.
Yeah, is that right? 2000.
So talk to me a little bit about what you've seen as far as the climate and the environment change from how you grew up to when you come back after a 30-year absence.
And I really love what Ms. Pearl had said, and I could relate to all that she had said. That's my friend, too. One of the things that I thought about even as Ms. Pearl was speaking, added to even what Stephanie said about with the added concrete. So let's just talk about New Nashville and the building, how our environment and the climate has shifted. So as all this concrete being added in green spaces, but also with all this building, not just dust, but particles, chemical products that are filling the air. And even today, while we're sitting here waiting, people got all kinds of sinus problems. My understanding is that because Nashville's in a valley anyway, we've already had some sensitivity to this impact on people of sinus problems. But it's greatly changed by growth. What we have sacrificed for economic growth without thought in our development, looking at how this impacts people. So I want to add that dimension to it. All of this chemical stuff in the air that's causing a lot of sickness.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil A. Colonna. We're discussing an oral history project on climate change here in Nashville. My guests are Miss Elios Freeman and Stephanie Roach. Now, Stephanie, in the last segment, you talked a little about intact communities. Question I have is, like, who has the onus or responsibility to rebuild the foundation of a community so that it, once it becomes intact? Some of the institutions from years ago no longer have the reach or sway that they once did. I'd love for both of you to answer this. Who could fill this role? As a matter of fact, Miss Elios, well, I'd like you to answer first.
I was going to raise my hand.
Yes, ma'am.
I really believe that the people who are agents in its destruction have absolute responsibility. Who are those agents of destruction? Our state government that formed plans that deliberately brought an interstate through a community and destroyed its business district with intention and broke up community with intention. Our city government that has made decisions around economic growth at the cost of the lives of people in terms of education and secure communities. They have ultimate responsibility for investing in the community in tangible ways on the basis of what the voices of the community are saying now. The corporations have major responsibility too, and, institutions have to, nonprofit funders, everybody has a part to play. Mm-hmm. But I want to really highlight those who are the reason why it got destroyed, and that is our government agents. And we could even go back to federal government, federal policies.
In your interview, you talked about the interstate going through North Nashville. You just mentioned it now. What can be done now to help alleviate and fix some of the problems that were caused with that?
This, to me, is where you listen to the people in the community who are saying different things that can be done. So one of the things that we know is, we can't undo what did happen, but we do know that people want to be able to have living spaces. Now, we're having a lot of building of homes and apartments for people in our city, but it's not the people who have been here generationally or even working class people or even professional people. So one of the things is we talk about, and especially when we talk about government people, change of policies. Now, what does that mean in terms of, state legislature and the, city council? And one of the things I hear people say is those are not the people who build, but they are people who make policies about building. So then we're talking about developers who are building. And I know all the stories about cost, so that's why rents have to be that high. Somehow there's got to be a change in the stories we tell about why we can't do it. Something dramatic has to happen differently on the parts of these agents on the basis of what the community says we need. So we need living space. So that means these places need to have lower cost. People need a guaranteed income. I'm an advocate of that. Let me go and get it in here. People need a guaranteed income. So that, really, that solves a lot of problems. If everybody had a income, a livable wage, or an income they could live off of, they could even pay the high prices. Okay, let's say that. Just give everybody what they need and we'll pay the high prices.
Mm-hmm. Stephanie?
When I hear Elios talk, it is edifying to my soul. I really believe that the thrust of this project is to provide a platform of leadership and empowerment, because these initiatives, while you're right, Elios, are the responsibility. There is certainly a lot to be had at the metro level. There's a lot of great momentum on the ground. That grassroots needs a lightning rod. They need a flashpoint that they can rally around. And yes, environmental justice and discussion about the shifting climate and the climate changes that we know are happening. This could be the ticket. This could be the issue that inspires and brings the community together. So that's what I'd like to see, is more leadership and allow that and empower that group.
Ms. Elios?
And that's good. And I think in connecting previous pieces of this conversation, we're talking about storytelling. So I think that we need to tell an honest story. So a little piece of what I just said is what we need to keep in the forefront when we talk about causes. Let's be dramatically honest about things that have happened that because it's hidden and we don't discuss it, we don't deal with. Mm-hmm. And so I think an oral storytelling project where you really hear from different people, I'm just one voice. That's why by hearing with many other voices, we'll hear other perspectives, other solutions. So in even your job of This is Nashville, let's hear these stories. Mm-hmm. But don't just leave it as nice storytelling that even we do exhibitions about and have gatherings. Let's take that as our challenge to begin to build differently.
And so I do want to ask you something about that. You know,
Yes.
This project is wonderful. There's been other projects similar to it. And people from all over different neighborhoods, different communities in Nashville are going to go. They're going to watch it. They're going to see it. They're going to feel with it. They're going to sympathize, empathize with it. They're going to feel it. How do you take that emotional energy that is stored up from sharing these stories to encourage actual citizens? I'm talking outside of policymakers. I'm talking outside of lawmakers and outside of developers and business folks. But the people who are our neighbors and live on the street, how are we going to get them to do more than put up a sign on the front of their yard that says that they support this, to actually get out there, put some blood, sweat, tears, money, and sweat equity into supporting it?
I think first off, I mean, as an education nonprofit, our main goal is to educate. You literally have to get this story out there first. You would be so surprised at how many Nashvillians are completely unaware of what's going on. Yeah.
And I would add, too, that there are many people who are doing just what you said. There are people who are working and building in many pockets. So part of reason for getting stories out is that we find those people so that we hear what they're doing for building. And then that people who then have some resource that gets back to those other people that we just named, that then they engage to assist people who are building in getting it done. So an example would be the church that I minister in and grew up in, Westwood Baptist Church University Center, but also other churches. You know, we are property owners, so we provide rentals opportunities for people. There are many people who do something similar on a grassroots level. That's just one area where how do all these wonderful projects for affordable housing, how do we tangibly give people what they need for being able to build? So same thing in health areas. You've got people who are doing things grassroots. My vision and passion is how do we get resource to people who don't have it, who are doing that kind of building you're talking about. So to me, that would be the wonderful vision when people hear these kinds of things. Connect with some new people. Find those grassroots people who are doing it, but they just need more resource.
What kind of conversations do people need to have with their neighbors so they do something about it?
Yeah, I think that's another piece of it. So, you know, it's not just one thing to be done. So I think that one of the things that will happen in terms of grassroots organizing, that's actually the nature of grassroots organizing, that you get out there and you find ways to tell your story to people. And so let's connect with these different people who are doing it. I'm telling you, it's so many people who are doing those kinds of things. They meet in places, Black National Assembly, you got the Ministers Assembly. I mean, across any arena. I can't start naming those I know of. But those people are literally doing that kind of thing. So let's find out who they are, where they need additional support. Some people are strong and they're doing it, and they get resources. Let's support them, but let's find the ones who really are doing it, who need more resources. My little piece.
I love that too. You know, one of our TSU students who worked on the project, she actually named the groups, the community groups that are already doing a lot of this work. She called them empowerment contacts. And I thought that was so rich because you need to be able to weave that into the narrative. And by doing so, you weave neighbors together. That's a lot of it, is that neighbors need to just start talking to each other. We've been isolated in many ways post-pandemic. So let's start bringing back together. And I love the idea that the oral history can serve as this initial springboard for bringing together, knitting together all those groups, and then making a place where they can disseminate from there.
Stephanie Roach is going to stick with us through the break. I want to thank Miss Elios Freeman, community activist, organizer, and native Nashvilleian. Thank you so much, Miss Elios, for being here.
Thank you. I'm also a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ Yeshua, so I'd like to add that to it.
Yes, ma'am. All right, we're going to take this last break for the hour. When we come back, we're going to ask, where do we go next given an uncertain future? You can join the conversation by finding us on Threads, Blue Sky, or for now, X at This Is Nashville. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil A. Kulona, and this is Nashville. This hour, we've been talking about a project that not only gives a voice to people who've been living on the margins of Nashville. The project will also inform us on how the growing issue of climate change is affecting us. From the Nashville Justice Initiative and a collaborative effort from TSU and Urban Green Lab, there is this project that hears from some people in North Nashville about how climate change affects their lives. We've got one more clip from this oral history project of another previous guest on the show, Frederick Cawthon. He is a hemp master in our state. Let's listen.
And even when you talk about the tornado and how it traveled, that's because of how we've been, I would say, destroying the land. We're just trying to build all these neighborhoods and not really taking into account, well, what does Mother Nature feel about this? You know, where to me, when I grew up, everything that, when I'm walking the land with my grandfather, he was always talking was about the earth and the impact of what we're doing to the earth. By the 80s, it was all about profit. How can we make more money versus how are we impacting the earth? And so what can we do beyond just the medicinal side of hemp? And where I'm going with that is, I'm looking at the industrial applications, sequestering CO2 from the atmosphere. Because hemp is a big player and can be even a player. In fact, average layman wouldn't even know that. In 2004, State Senator Frank and a contingent from the state of Tennessee, a delegation went to Europe. And while they were there, they visited the Mercedes-Benz plant, who was already putting hemp in vehicles to be able to meet the 2030 mandate by Europe to be carbon neutral. It was 2015 that Tennessee legalized hemp for research purposes. The only reason that made sense in this Republican state was what they saw in Europe. It wasn't even about the CBD. It wasn't definitely about the Delta 8 and everything else that has come since 2019 Farm Bill. It was about the industrial applications.
We can make
money, but Europe was looking at it as we can save the planet.
So you're saying Europe actually cared about that?
Yes. Okay. That's what drove it.
Okay.
Was they realized that the amount of storms, the tornadoes, hurricanes, the heating up of the planet. People say, yeah, the climate is always changing. Yeah, but that's the problem. When I was a kid, we actually got snow in the wintertime, like a couple weeks, like school would be shut down. And we got several feet of snow in the South. Whereas you feel, being a military kid, I lived in Florida before I moved back to Tennessee. Our winters are like when I was growing up in Florida.
So the winters now are like, we've got Florida winters.
We got Florida winters, but then look at what happens. Hurricane season or tornado season has expanded. Like we're doing something, and this is not normal.
Definitely not normal. Stephanie, what are your thoughts on hearing what Freddie had to share with us?
It's powerful, very powerful. What Freddie discusses, what he shares, especially about that expanding of the seasons. It's difficult to be able to read our climate anymore. And that will that will impact Nashvillians in full, for sure. It does give me hope, again, that there are groups out there that have recognized the issue and are starting to provide solutions, both at the human level, but then also to addressing the commerce and, the way that we've built our economy and our built landscape.
I'd like to welcome our next guest. Lynn Edmondson is a curator and teacher at John Early Museum Magnet Middle School. Have the kids say that 5 times fast. Lynn, thank you so much for being with us.
I am so very glad to be here. And even more than that, I'm so very glad to be a part of this project. This is powerful. And I think that the implications for our children, for the North Nashville community, are incredible.
Tell me what the program is doing with the students at John Early.
Well, we're going to look at everything from the oral history. We're going to look at the research. We're going to then be able to look at how do we as junior curators, our students, how do we take the information that we know and then pass it on to the community? My vision for John Early is that we are not seen as just a school with a museum, but that the community sees us as a museum that services the community. So they are giving us an opportunity to truly service the community.
Now, in your conversations with the students at John Early, have they expressed concerns and worries about the climate and the environment?
Well, I think you have to understand that their age precludes them from knowing a lot of information. I think that climate change for them could very possibly be a foreign term because it's not something that a 5th grader, a 6th grader, a 7th grader is used to hearing. But once they gather the information, once they see the research, once they hear from community and community leaders that this is dynamically impacting our community, it's going to be incredible because and I don't know whether most people realize it, but a museum is an extension of the classroom. So these children are going to be able to talk to them about research, talk to the community about the impact, and they're going to look at them and say, hey, these are small fries talking to us and educating us. But this is what our community needs to see and hear from the smallest and the youngest in the community.
Can you break down some of the program? Like, tell us what you're planning?
Yes, we're looking at, and we were talking about doing oral history recordings so that people who maybe have not been recorded can be recorded so that everyone gets a chance to talk about the way it was, but the way it is now. We're also looking at researching in science classes and just being able to put an exhibit together with Green Lab that shows how Nashville, especially North Nashville, has changed over the years.
Sometimes I used to teach middle school. They can be too cool for school sometimes. It's hard to get them engaged. What are you planning to do to get them engaged, to keep their level of engagement high?
Well, I think that you keep the level of engagement high when you are doing activities that they understand, when you're doing activities or you're not just saying, hey, do this, but this is the reason why. Let me show you the cause and the effect. I think that keeps them engaged. And when they are able to go and talk to someone intelligently, we talk about in the standards, MMPS, being able to listen, active listening, but also being able to speak effectively. I think that they will be able to do this.
Stephanie, why is it important to have this museum and middle school, this area? Why is it important to have this type of connective space? Why is that so important to the community?
Well, this project is of the community and for the community, so I can think of no better place to start. When I think about your students, Lynn, I think about this is an issue that is near and dear to them. This is something that they are passionate about and that they're living amongst, And a lot of times, like you mentioned, and Dr. Archer before you mentioned, oftentimes people don't realize that they're right in the middle of the maelstrom of a shifting climate and the impacts that they're feeling have a name. And I think this is where the good community building starts. And this is how we get into the community, by going to them and asking. And I do agree with you too, Lynn. I think this is an excellent opportunity to bring in these longer form voices. Those are these 16, what will end up will be the showstopper feature voices and perspectives. But I also want to have this component, Dr. Archer alluded to this as well, where we're collecting, shorter versions from many more people to add to this collection of perspectives on climate change.
And if you'll let me bump in.
Yes, ma'am.
Schools are about the business of imparting knowledge. Well, who better to impart knowledge than those children who are living in it? My grandmother used to say, when you know better, you do better. So if our children are passing on information, if they themselves are educating the adults, if they themselves are communicating this information, knowledge is power.
Now, I understand that gentrification has really impacted John Early Museum Middle School greatly. The school could have up to 700 students, but there's only 134 now.
Yes. The neighborhood is changing. And as I was listening to the other guests, I think about, I heard the term green space. Very little green space around our school anymore, where on one lot there may have been one home. There might be 3 tall skinnies. Yes, it's totally revamping the neighborhood in our North Nashville community.
So what's needed?
Well, one of the things I think that's needed is with me telling you that I'd like for the community to see the school, the museum, not as a school museum, but a community museum. It's very important that the community pours in, that the community is not just, that's the school that has a museum, but that museum belongs to our community. And when there's an investment, you're invested into the school, then the school thrives, the community thrives as well.
I have less than about a minute and a half left. So when you're thinking about some of these issues, folks can become despondent. And they acquiesce to the difficulty in many ways. And that's really different than being resilient, as we talked about earlier, or even adapting to the changes that are occurring. How do you both keep motivated and moving forward? Stephanie, you first, real quick.
That's a great question. The people that I work with are who buoy me through this challenge, this challenging time, this fight. And I always lean back onto, we're developing a community of care, even if in a small way. And I can only hope that just grows and grows and grows with its momentum.
As a teacher, I can't help but be motivated because the children are our future. But if we don't equip them to be what we need in the future becomes stagnant. So I'm excited because we are about to impart all kinds of information that will help them look at the future, look at what could be in all kinds of new ways that will help not just North Nashville, but will help the Nashville community.
Real quick, Stephanie, in your wildest dreams, where does the project go from here?
Oh, I want to be in all the museums. I want this touring exhibition that we're creating to start at John Early, head on to TSU.
Yes.
And then let's be in all those great public hubs so that we get a far, far reach to every type of Nashvilleian. Urban Green Lab is about sustainable education for all. That's where we want to be.
Stephanie Roach is the Assistant Director of Special Initiatives with Urban Green Lab, and Lynn B. Edmondson is the Instructional Designer at John Early Museum Magnet Middle School. Thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cleo.
And thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced and directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation does not end here. You can comment and tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message at 615-751-2500. You can also find us on Blue Sky and Instagram. And for now, you can still tweet us at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil A. Colonna. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and be good to each other.